The first thing Liam Arden noticed was the sound. It wasn't quite a hum and not quite a whisper, more like the breath of 1,000 distant clocks, each ticking at a slightly different time, as if the night itself were keeping several secret schedules at once. He opened his eyes to find himself sitting in a train carriage, its seats lined with deep green velvet that looked as though it belonged in another century. Dust drifted in the amber carriage light, rising and falling on invisible currents like tiny lanterns. The train wasn't moving. Beyond the window, silver fog curled and swayed like it was alive. It pressed against the glass, blotting out any view of what lay beyond. Every so often the mist brightened with a soft pulse, then settled again, as though answering a breath he couldn't hear. Liam pushed himself up, feeling the stillness across his skin. The lights above flickered, revealing small details, an abandoned scarf on the opposite seat, a half-empty teacup trembling ever so slightly, and a crumpled piece of paper under his hand, warm from his palm as if it had been waiting for him. He unfolded it. It was a drawing, one he knew too well. Swirling lines formed a sky full of strange, sharp symbols, curves tangled with angles, little star-like asters with tails like comets. They seemed to glimmer on the page, as if they had been sketched with starlight on thin frost. At the bottom, in hurried, uneven letters, was a single word: "Find me." The air grew colder. The carriage's velvet seemed to hold its breath. He whispered her name without meaning to. Ellie. It was his sister's handwriting. The loops on the E's, the tilt of the M, the tiny dot over the I that always looked a touch late, unmistakable, even in haste. Ellie. He called, but his voice fell soft and small in the space, as if the carriage wanted quiet. Liam hurried to the door at the end of the carriage, gripping the brass handle. It was unexpectedly warm to the touch, as though another hand had recently held it. The moment he opened it, a breath of cool, fragrant air brushed against his face, a scent like rain on stone and wildflowers after dark. The fog parted in slow spirals. He stepped down onto a narrow platform, the wood damp beneath his shoes. A single lamppost stood at its center, its light golden and soft, circled by fluttering moths. Somewhere far away a bell rang, not to warn or summon, but to remember. He glanced at the sign above the station entrance. The letters shimmered and shifted, refusing to settle into a name he could read. They gathered and scattered like silver fish. From the darkness beyond the lamppost, a figure emerged. A woman in a long coat, holding a lantern that glowed with a quiet blue flame. The light didn't only illuminate her face, it pressed the fog back in a perfect circle, revealing the slick shine of the boards, the curve of the station roof, the faint outline of another track vanishing into night. "You're late," she said, her voice calm but certain, as though she'd been waiting for him a long time and had never doubted he would arrive. Liam took a step closer, his pulse quickening. "Do you know where she is?" The woman tilted her head, the lantern's blue light dancing in her eyes. "That depends," she said slowly. "Do you remember how to see?" "I am seeing," he said, almost laughing, except nothing about the moment felt like laughter. "Not with these." She tapped the air near his eyes with a gloved finger. "With these." She tapped the space over his heart. "The city shows itself to those who ask kindly." Before he could ask what she meant, the lantern flared brighter, and the world around him shifted without moving. The fog loosened like a curtain, and there, revealed just beyond the edge of the platform, stretched a city unlike any he had ever known, streets curving like rivers under moonlight, towers leaning together as if exchanging secrets, windows aglow with sleep-warm light. Above, the strange symbols from Ellie's drawing burned faintly among the constellations, not ink on paper now but pale fires. "Where am I?" he breathed. The woman considered. "Between," she said. "Between where you came from and where you must go. Walk kindly. Ask gently. The city listens." She turned as if to leave, then paused. "Take this," she said, and pressed something cool into his palm, a slender key of dull silver, its bow shaped like a seven-pointed star. "It opens only doors that want to be opened. "What do I call you?" he asked. Her mouth curved in a smile that felt like an answered riddle. "Tonight," she said, "you may call me Lantern." Lantern lifted the blue flame, and the bridge from platform to pavement formed out of mist and rain. Liam stepped onto it. The surface had the firmness of stone and the give of water, and as he walked, faint characters flickered beneath his feet like reflections of a language he almost remembered. On the far side, the city's breath met him, warm in some corners, cool in others, like walking past kitchens and gardens at once. Somewhere a music box turned a melody he did not know but felt he'd heard drifting through childhood windows. He looked back to thank Lantern, but the platform had already been swallowed by fog. Only the key remained in his hand, warming to his skin, and the word on the paper echoing in his mind, "Find me." A clock chimed, not 12, not 1, a patient note that belonged to no hour he could name. The lamplight deepened. Ahead, a lane of pearly cobbles shone faintly, beckoning, and on the far wall someone had chalked a simple symbol, a small star with a short tail. Ellie's mark. Somewhere in that impossible city, she was waiting. Liam set his shoulders, tucked the paper into his pocket, and stepped into the listening streets. The city breathed. That was Liam's first thought as his eyes adjusted to its gentle dark. The air moved with a rhythm too slow to count, the way trees might breathe if they had lungs, the way seas might dream if they slept. It wasn't the usual hum of traffic or the rise and fall of conversations. Instead, tiny sounds threaded the night, the soft patter of leaves against slate, the distant turning of pages, the murmur of water beneath stones. He followed the lane of pearly cobbles. Each step answered with a small, rounded echo, as if the path recognized his weight and made a note of it. Buildings leaned in friendly ways. Some were thin and tall with roofs like folded paper, others were round, their walls furred with ivy that shone silver where moonlight found it. Balconies sagged contentedly under boxes of night-blooming flowers. Above him, bridges stretched between rooftops, some broad enough for carts, others no wider than a person's shoulders. Through their gaps he saw the sky where symbols drifted like slow fish, pale and patient. They looked a little different from the drawing, as if the city translated them into its own accent. "What is this place?" he asked the key in his hand, because there was no one else. The key warmed, which felt like as good an answer as any. At the lane's end stood a wooden door, its surface carved with scenes that changed when he blinked, a river that flowed upward into stars, a child reaching for a key, a clock with no hands and yet a perfect sense of time. Words gathered at the edges of his mind and then slipped away. He lifted the silver key. The lock accepted it the way a palm accepts another palm. The door swung inward on a breath of scents, oil and citrus and something like old snow. The room beyond was narrow and tall, walled with clocks. Grandfather clocks stood shoulder to shoulder, pendulums swinging in kind-eyed disagreement. Pocket watches hung from the ceiling on fine chains, a weather of time. Under glass domes, delicate timepieces ticked with the restraint of garden birds. "Closed," said a voice, not unkindly. A man in a waistcoat emerged from behind the counter. His hair was the color of first frost on river stones, his eyes a soft gray that had seen many beginnings. He did not seem surprised to see Liam. If anything, he looked relieved. "You've brought me another," he said, as if remarking on the weather. "Lantern sent me," Liam said. "I'm looking for my sister." The man nodded, the way a person nods when a long-expected letter finally arrives. "Then you'll need the right hour." He reached beneath the counter and drew out a brass clock small enough to fit in a hand. Instead of numbers, its face bore tiny constellations. One hand was a thin sliver shaped like a needle, the other resembled a branch with 3 tender twigs. He wound it once. The hand spun, not fast, not slow, like a thought deciding what it wanted. They settled on a star Liam recognized from Ellie's drawing, 7 points, one longer than the rest. "When the sky matches this," the man said, "you will find your next door. The city enjoys a good alignment." "I don't know where to start looking," Liam admitted. Everything feels like a beginning. That's because it is. The man smiled with his eyes. Beginnings tend to come disguised as streets. Start where the city hums the loudest. And remember, the road you see is not always the road you walk. Liam turned the clock over. The back was engraved with a line of words in a language whose sense he somehow felt rather than read. It soothed him, the way a lullaby soothes even when you don't know the words. "Do I owe you anything?" he asked. "Only patience." The man's smile deepened, as if patience were a rare coin and he liked to see it in circulation. "I am keeper, by the way. If you get lost, ask a window for me. Most will remember." Outside, the air had shifted, cooler, carrying a ribbon of river scent. Liam slipped the clock into his pocket and stepped onto a wider street where lanterns were strung from house to house like tame stars. The clock ticked steadily against his palm, a creature's heartbeat. He listened for the city's hum. He heard it in stages. First, the hush of gardens. Then the darker music of water rushing in unseen channels under the stones. Then something else, a tone like a single tuning fork held far away. He followed it to a square paved with moonpale rock. In the center, a fountain shaped like a ring of open books spilled water that flowed upward before drifting into mist. People, or perhaps the word was residents, sat on benches and talked in low, thoughtful voices that didn't carry. On the far side of the square, narrow alleys shimmered, lazy as heat. One in particular glinted with a familiar chalk mark, a small star with a short tail. Ellie's mark. Liam stepped toward it. The air changed. The hum grew nearer, softer but clearer, and the alley lengthened the way corridors in dreams do, enough to hold everything that needed to be in it. A cat padded out of shadow to meet him, its coat the exact color of the hour before dawn. "Hello," Liam said, because hello was a key that opened many doors. The cat sat and wrapped its tail around its feet. Its eyes were green the way moss is green on old stone. "You took your time," it said, without moving its mouth, in the way of places that speak directly to the listening part of you. "But here you are, which is the important part." "I'm looking for my sister," Liam said. "Have you seen?" "Names first," said the cat politely. "This is a city. We do things in order." "Liam." "Rose," said the cat, which was an unexpected name for a cat and therefore suited it perfectly. "Follow, if you like. Doors are easier in good company." Rose led him down the alley, where stones were set in the pattern of a slow river. Overhead, a rope of tiny bells chimed at the slightest breath. The chalk star appeared again on a turning, then again on a low step. Each time, Liam's heart steadied. Ellie had been here. Ellie had walked this way. At the end of the alley stood a door no wider than his shoulders, painted the color of midnight tea. Liam lifted the silver key. It grew warm. The clock in his pocket ticked once, twice, in agreement. The door opened inward to a hush that felt like the first page of a book. And the city, pleased, breathed in. The room beyond the midnight door felt as though it had been waiting for him for years. The first thing Liam noticed was the smell, warm paper, candle wax, and something faintly sweet, like fruit left to ripen in sunlight. A single lamp burned on a low desk in the center, its shade patterned with tiny holes that scattered constellations over the walls. Everywhere he looked, there were books. They weren't stacked or shelved in the usual way. Instead, they rested in small clusters, each tied together with ribbon or twine, like gatherings of old friends who refused to be separated. Some lay open, their pages slowly turning on their own as if a gentle wind moved through the room. Others whispered faintly when he passed, syllables just out of reach. Rose, the cat, padded across the floor without making a sound. She leapt onto the desk and settled into the circle of lamplight, her eyes closing to half-moons. "You'll want to speak to Archivist," she murmured, her tail twitching once. "Archivist?" Liam echoed. Before Rose could answer, a shape emerged from between two tall bookstands, a figure draped in robes the color of weathered parchment, their sleeves lined with gold thread that caught the lamplight. The archivist's face was gentle and unhurried, their eyes a deep amber, like resin holding centuries of memory. "You've brought me a seeker," the archivist said to Rose, though their gaze remained on Liam. "He's looking for his sister," Rose replied simply. The archivist nodded slowly. "Many seek. Fewer remember what they are seeking for." They stepped closer, and Liam felt a quiet authority in their presence, not commanding, but certain, like someone who had walked these rooms for 100 lifetimes. Without asking, they took the paper from Liam's pocket, Ellie's drawing. Their fingers hovered above it, not touching the ink, yet the symbols shimmered faintly in response. "These marks," the archivist said softly, "are not merely directions. They are invitations." "Invitations to what?" Liam asked. "To cross." The archivist moved toward a far wall where a large tapestry hung. At first glance, it showed only a night sky, but as Liam's eyes adjusted, he saw that the stars shifted slowly, forming and reforming constellations he didn't recognize. Some burned brighter, others dimmed as if waiting for a signal. The archivist gestured to one particular cluster, 7 stars, one with a longer point, exactly like the mark on Ellie's paper and the star on the clock face. "This alignment will not last long," they murmured. "When it comes, you will find her door. But only if you carry the right memory." "What do you mean?" "Memories are keys," they said simply. "A door will not open for someone who has nothing to bring through it." Liam thought of his sister, how she used to hum while drawing, the way her laughter filled a room, the little notes she'd slip into his jacket pocket before a trip. Was that enough? Or was there something he had forgotten entirely? The archivist reached behind the desk and produced a small, round object wrapped in velvet. They unwrapped it to reveal a silver compass. Instead of a needle, a droplet of light floated in its center, pulsing faintly. "This will not point north," the archivist explained. "It will point to where your memory is strongest. Follow it, and you may find what you have misplaced." Rose hopped down from the desk, brushing against Liam's leg. "Don't lose it," she said, though her tone suggested she already knew he wouldn't. As the archivist handed him the compass, the light inside flared, not brightly, but warmly, like the glow of a candle in cupped hands. Liam felt a tug in his chest, subtle but undeniable, pulling him toward the door opposite the one he had entered. "That will lead you to the dream quarter," the archivist said. "It is not always the same shape, but tonight it may be willing to help you. Be polite. And if you hear music with no source, follow it." Liam nodded, clutching the compass, the clock, and the silver key, 3 small anchors in a city that felt like it might drift away if he stopped paying attention. He stepped toward the door. Rose padded beside him without asking if she was invited. The moment the door swung open, a warm breeze brushed his face, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers and something else, the faintest thread of a tune, delicate as spun glass. He glanced at Rose. "Do you hear that?" Her whiskers twitched. "Of course. That's the point." They stepped through together. The dream quarter was unlike the streets he'd seen before. Here, the buildings glowed faintly from within, their walls made of something between stone and glass, shimmering with hints of color that shifted like the surface of water. The air itself felt soft, almost weightless, and as they walked, Liam noticed that his footsteps made no sound at all. Every few steps, the compass in his palm tugged slightly left or right, guiding him through archways and across bridges that looked too delicate to hold their weight but somehow did. The music grew stronger, still without any visible source, as if the entire quarter itself was humming a lullaby. They turned one last corner, and Liam stopped. Ahead, set into the curve of a pale blue wall, was another door, taller than the others, framed by vines whose flowers opened and closed in time with the music. On the door, drawn in soft white chalk, was Ellie's star. The door with Ellie's star did not feel like wood when Liam touched it. It felt like the cool of a morning window, the kind you press your forehead against before the day is quite awake. The flowers that framed it breathed open and closed, their petals sighing softly in time with the invisible music. The silver key warmed in his hand. The pocket clock ticked a little faster, as though leaning forward to listen. "Do I just turn it?" Liam asked no one in particular. "Ask," Rose said, sitting primly and wrapping her tail around her feet. "Doors appreciate manners." Liam bowed his head, feeling slightly foolish and then, oddly, not. "Please," he said to the tall, blue door. "I'm looking for my sister. I think she left this sign for me." The chalk star brightened, its long point glowing like a small comet. The door unlatched itself with a gentle click, and a line of pale light appeared, widening into an invitation. He stepped through. Inside was not a room but a garden at night, held indoors by a ceiling of glass that showed a sky much nearer than the sky outside. Ferns unfurled along curved paths, small lamps floated like paper moons above low benches. In the center stood a circular pool so still it could have been polished stone, until a petal fell onto it and ripples stitched themselves outward in perfect rings. The music that had guided him here seemed to be coming from the pool, yet it had no reflection for sound. Liam approached its edge, the compass glowing faintly in his palm. The droplet of light within it pulsed, then pointed, not outward but down, toward the water. "Memories," said a voice near his elbow. Liam turned. A woman sat on a bench partly swallowed by fern fronds. She was older than Lantern and younger than Keeper, or perhaps she was neither. Age in this city traveled on different roads. She wore a shawl the color of late peaches and had ink stains on her fingers. "I am the listener," she said, not moving from her seat. "I tend the places where things return, including songs that forgot their words and footsteps that couldn't find their owners. You have something to put back and something to take with you." Liam began, and then realized he knew what she meant. He held the compass a little tighter. "Archivist said I would need a memory." "All doors require one," Listener said. "The self that passes through must be carrying itself. Choose gently. You can't carry everything at once." Liam knelt by the pool. Within its dark surface the glass-ceilinged sky lay like another world. A drift of stars slid past, and for a moment he imagined he could reach in and lift one out, cupped like a firefly. The music threaded around his thoughts, steadying them. What memory was his best key? Ellie's handwriting? Her laugh? 1,000 tiny moments jostled politely for attention, her humming while she drew, the way she would tuck her hair behind her ear twice when concentrating. The afternoon they'd missed their stop on the bus and decided it was fate, so they walked home past the bakery and shared a warm roll and paper. "That one," Listener said gently, though Liam hadn't spoken. The warm roll. The paper crinkling. The sugar dusting your sleeve. You were both a little annoyed and a little delighted, and the day made room for both. Liam smiled despite himself. He could smell it now, that bright yeasty warmth, could hear Ellie saying, "We weren't meant to be where we were going anyway." He let the memory grow until it filled his chest without crowding anything else. The pool accepted it. A small point of light rose from the water, hovered like a curious moth, and then drifted into the compass. The droplet inside glowed brighter, steadier, as if pleased to have a companion. "Good," Listener said. "Now you may ask for the path that matches that feeling." "How do I?" But the pool was already moving. A thin line of light drew itself from the far edge to the near, the way a seam appears when a book wants to be opened. The line became a bridge, no wider than the span of his hand, yet when Liam put his foot on it, it widened just enough. "Come," Rose said, already trotting ahead with the precise authority of someone who had never once fallen into a pool by accident. They crossed to a small archway woven with vines of silver thread. Beyond it, the dream quarter rearranged itself into lanes of soft blue. The lamps here were lower, the buildings closer, and the air tasted faintly of oranges. Liam's pocket clock gave a quick, eager tick. He drew it out. On its constellation face, the 7-pointed star was drifting toward true. Keeper said I'd find the next door when the sky matched this, he murmured. Then keep walking until the sky agrees, Rose replied. Skies are stubborn but not unkind. They passed a row of shuttered windows painted with scenes from summer. One window, though closed, had a crack through which laughter leaked as breeze, another smelled faintly of chalk dust and late afternoon. At the end of the row sat a cart with no owner, piled with folded maps whose lines rearranged themselves when Liam blinked. A small sign hung from its handle, "Take what takes you." He picked up a map at random and watched as it bloomed into a sketch of the streets around them, then tightened to a single path that curved like a question mark. When he looked away and back again, it had changed to a spiral, then an arrow pointing up. Maps like to be useful, Rose said approvingly. Follow its opinion. They climbed a staircase that had not been there a moment before, each step engraved with a word that faded as soon as he'd read it: kindness, patience, listening, bread, lantern, stone. At the top, a small plaza opened like a palm, and in its center stood a clock without hands. Instead, the entire face slowly turned, skyward. The 7-pointed star on Liam's pocket clock reached the topmost point and settled, humming like a note finally found. Somewhere a bell rang that did not belong to any hour he knew. A narrow door appeared on the far side of the plaza, so narrow it might have been a mistake, a seam in the wall. Its surface was not painted but woven, threads of night and dusk and quiet afternoon crossing each other. At eye level, one thread was white. It curved into the shape of a short-tailed star. Ellie's mark, certain as a heartbeat. Liam breathed out, and only then realized he'd been holding his breath since the plaza began. He glanced at Rose. You brought the right memory, she said. Say thank you. To the map? He asked, and then, catching himself, to the plaza, the air, the clock that wasn't a clock, thank you. The woven door loosened, the threads drifting apart like gentle river weed. Warm shadows spilled through. He stepped inside. This time the room was small and familiar in an ache-making way, a table with 2 chairs, a low shelf with a tin of colored pencils, a window with no view, only light. On the table lay a paper bag dusted with sugar. Liam touched it. The grainy sweetness stuck to his fingertips exactly as it had that afternoon on the walk home. Something in the far corner moved, not a person, but a memory rearranging itself to make space. A line of white chalk on the floor described a hopscotch grid, and beyond it a wall held a framed scrap of paper covered in circles and stars. The handwriting on it was careful, then increasingly delighted near the bottom. Ellie, practicing the symbols from her drawings the way other children practiced alphabets. Are you seeing this? Liam whispered. Rose didn't answer. She was studying the blank window as if it were a cat from a rival neighborhood. After a long moment, she said, Do you hear the city breathing? Liam listened. The hush moved in and out like a tide. And beneath it, softer still, he heard a thread of humming. Not the dream quarters lullaby, but a human tune, steady and small, like someone keeping themselves company. Ellie's hum. It wasn't in the room. It was just beyond, like a hand you could almost reach in the dark. How do I get there? He asked. Same way you got here, Rose said. With what you carry. Liam looked around. The table, the sugar-dusted bag, the tin of pencils. He picked up the tin and opened it. Inside, each pencil had been sharpened carefully, then worn down by use. On the underside of the lid, a message had been pressed faintly backward into the metal, as if someone had written very hard on paper laid on top of it. He turned the tin to catch the light. Letters rose out of shadow, find the door that isn't a door. The blank window brightened. Not a picture appeared, but a feeling, air moving on the other side, sunlight caught in dust, the sensation of a curtain lifting. A window is a courteous door, Rose said, approving. It asks rather than insists. Liam set the tin aside and stood before the window. May I come through? He asked. Please. The glass answered with warmth beneath his palm. It softened, not melting, not vanishing, simply becoming a kind of air that remembered being glass. He stepped forward. On the other side, he found a landing at the top of a narrow stair. The humming was clearer now, pure as thread drawn through cloth. He followed it down, one careful step at a time, Rose's paws clicking lightly beside him. At the bottom, a hallway stretched in both directions, lit by small lamps set low to the floor. The hum came from the left. He turned, and stopped. For along the wall, at shoulder height, a procession of small, framed mirrors caught the lamplight and sent it back in soft, overlapping echoes. In each, just for an instant, he thought he saw a familiar hand set down a chalk star and move away. Ellie. Not captured, not trapped, moving, living, going on ahead. Ellie. His voice tried to run and settled instead into a careful walk. It's me. The humming paused, then resumed, closer now, like someone waiting around a gentle corner. Liam went on, steady, pocket clock as warm as a small sparrow in his hand, compass glowing with the borrowed brightness of bread and paper and sugar. He did not rush. The city liked to meet people who kept its pace. At the end of the hallway stood another unremarkable door. No chalk this time. No sign. Only a feeling the way fields feel in late summer, full, listening, almost ready. He raised his knuckles to knock. The door, kind as an old friend, opened first. The door that opened like an old friend revealed a room shaped almost like a breath, narrow at the entrance, widening to a soft, rounded space that pooled with lamplight. The ceiling curved low, painted with faded constellations whose names had worn away from being loved. The floor was covered in woven rugs that remembered every footstep and did not creak when reminded. The humming had stopped. In its place was a quiet that was not empty. It sounded, to Liam, like the moment between a question and its answer. Rose slipped in first and made a small, approving sound deep in her chest. "Listening room," she said. "It listens to you until you remember what you mean." Liam closed the door behind them. The latch settled with a patient click. On the far wall, a window framed a slice of the city's night, rooflines leaning toward one another, a far-off bridge strung with the gentlest lanterns. On the sill lay a piece of chalk the length of a finger and a cloth folded into a neat square. "Find the door that isn't a door," Liam murmured, remembering the tin's backward message and the window that had softened into air. The chalk on the sill felt cool, expectant. He picked it up. "Ellie," he called, his voice the soft edge of a question. "If you can hear me." No answer came in words. Instead, a feeling pressed lightly against him, like a hand placed between his shoulder blades to steady him at a curb. The compass in his pocket warmed. He drew it out, the droplet of light inside pulsed in a steady rhythm, and when he turned toward the blank length of wall beside the window, the light brightened. Rose's eyes half closed, pleased. "Walls are only waiting for an idea," she said. Liam lifted the chalk and, with a care that felt ceremonial, drew Ellie's star, 7 points, one a little longer, its tail short and sure. When he finished the last stroke, the chalk left a lingering thread of luminescence. The star did not shine brighter, it breathed. The breath of it seemed to synchronize with his own. The wall softened where the star was. Not like melting, not like dissolving, more like a memory finding exactly where it fit. Liam placed his palm against the cool surface. "Please," he whispered. "I've brought what I'm meant to bring." The wall answered not with an opening but with an image. It wasn't quite a picture, more an impression, as if the room had decided to hold a memory up to the light so he could see its grain. A table. 2 cups. Paper dusted with sugar. A line of handwriting that leaned a little at the end of each sentence. Ellie's voice arrived the way dawn arrives in houses with deep eaves, gently, around the edges. "You took long enough," she said, and the smile and the words made Liam's knees feel momentarily unreliable. "Where are you?" His throat tightened around the question, but the room had no interest in swallowing tears. It liked clear words. How do I get to you? You already are where I am, Ellie's voice replied, close and far at once. But the city likes the right steps. It's a dance. A pause, the sound of her thinking. Do you have the little clock? Yes. He lifted it. The constellation face glowed faintly, and the seven-pointed star sat at a place on its rim that felt like almost. The hands, the needle and the twig, held their poised disagreement with calm. Then wait with me, Ellie said. Wait like we did for the bread to be ready that time. Do you remember the buzz of the oven and the way the bell didn't ring the first minute we expected it to, and we laughed because we had to admit we didn't know everything? Liam smiled into the quiet. I remember. He sat on the rug, back against the curved wall, the clock warm in his palm, the compass bright as a candle in the other. Rose arranged herself precisely on his lap, her weight the comforting truth of now. Patience, she purred, which sounded almost like a compliment. Time in the listening room behaved like a cat in a sunbeam, it moved only when it wanted to. The window held a steady view of moon-washed roofs. Somewhere beyond it, a bell tested a note and then kept it. The ceiling's faded constellations resolved themselves into arrangements that never exactly repeated. Liam let his breathing match the star he had drawn, in and out, the way the city taught him to do with everything. Tell me something I've forgotten, he said softly, not to force the room, but to decorate the waiting. Ellie's voice unfolded, easy with affection. You forgot that you used to hum before sleep, very quietly, so you wouldn't wake me. It wasn't a tune that exists. You made it up every night and never kept it, which is funny, because you kept everything else. You hid notes for me, you saved dull pencils that still made good lines, you even kept that button you found on the tram because it looked like Saturn. I still have it, he said, surprised, not that she knew, but that he had not thought of it all day. In the old jar with the blue lid. Of course you do, Ellie said, pleased. Bring that feeling through the door. The keeping. The not keeping. Both. The clock's constellations shifted, a slow clarity finding its way through cloud. The seven-pointed star on its face drifted toward a mark that was not there until he needed it. When it found the place, the room seemed to inhale. The star he had drawn brightened by the smallest possible measure, which, in that moment, was almost everything. Now, Ellie said, so quietly he might have only thought it, say the name. Liam knew at once she didn't mean his or hers. The city rarely wanted the obvious. He looked at the chalk star, the softening wall, the patient window, the rugs that kept the shape of every step without complaint. An old tenderness rose in him, the kind that makes small things feel important and big things feel possible. He said, between. The wall opened, not with drama, not with rush, but like a curtain that had reached the end of its roll and was pleased with the performance. The opening did not reveal a corridor or a stair. It revealed a fold of night dense with nearby stars, as if the city had kept its own private sky for moments just like this. Rose hopped down and tested the threshold with a paw. Solid enough, she pronounced. For us. Are you there? Liam asked into the private sky. I'm here, Ellie said, and now the voice was not around edges. It was in front of him, where a figure stood, not in shadow, not in light, but in the kind of clarity that belongs to people you know. He did not rush forward. The city had taught him, arrivals deserve carefulness. He stepped through, and the air on the other side felt like the first evening of a season that has just turned. The private sky curved overhead like a bowl painted on the inside with all the constellations the listening room had practiced. At its center, a small platform held a low table, 2 cups, and a folded map whose lines rearranged themselves without ever growing tired. Ellie stood beside the table, her hands ink-dusted, a faint smear of sugar across one wrist as if time had refused to wash it away entirely. Her eyes brightened when she saw him, and even the word bright is not a bright enough word for what they did. You made it, she said. I followed your stars, he answered. Good, she said. Because now we need to follow yours. He blinked. Mine. Ellie nodded toward the private sky. The symbols he had seen all over the city, gentle, angular, sure of themselves, glimmered there. Amid them, softer and harder to spot, drifted marks that felt intimately familiar the instant he recognized them, tiny loops he tended to make when he wrote in a hurry, the way he always drew the tail on a comet a little too short, the small hook at the end of a line whenever he thought he was finished but wasn't. I left you a path, Ellie said, but you also left one for me. You just didn't know it. The city collected both. That's how we found the same between. Liam laughed, breathless with relief. Of course we did. Rose wound herself around their ankles one after the other, distributing approval in equal measure. Excellent, she said. A matched set. Ellie reached for his hand then, easy as reaching for a cup on a table she already knew the weight of. The contact wasn't a surprise and was perfect anyway. There's one more door, she said, glancing upward. It opens when two people remember the same thing at once. What thing? Liam asked. The simplest one, Ellie said. But we have to say it together. He looked at her, at the table, at the private sky that had accommodated both of their handwriting without complaint. The little clock hummed in his palm, patient as tide. The compass shone with the warm light of bread and paper and the walk home that had not been a mistake. He didn't know the last word yet, but he knew the feeling of it, the way a note feels when your mouth has not sung it but your heart has. Ready? Ellie asked. Liam nodded. They lifted their faces toward the bowl of night, where the seven-pointed stars and the small hooked comets drifted nearer to each other, arranging themselves into something readable at last. Together, they took a breath. And together, with the city listening, they spoke. The word they spoke was not in any language Liam could have written in a notebook. It felt more like a sound that had been resting in his chest for years, waiting for the right air to travel through. Soft, round, certain. When it left their mouths together, the private sky responded with a ripple that began in the center and moved outward, like a stone dropped into an ocean of night. The symbols above them shifted, but not in the restless way Liam had seen before. They settled. Every mark, Ellie's careful lines, his looping hurried strokes, found a place beside the other, making a pattern that was whole. The stars brightened as if pleased to have been understood. Somewhere in the city, bells began to ring. Not urgent, not commanding, simply glad. The kind of ringing that told you a door had been found, and this time, it would stay open as long as needed. The air at the far edge of the platform thickened, then thinned, and a new opening appeared. This was no narrow seam or curtained wall. It was a wide arch of warm light, like the threshold of a house that knew your name and had already set the table. Ellie glanced at him, her smile both invitation and agreement. This is ours, she said. They walked toward it together, Rose padding between them with the quiet satisfaction of a guide whose work is nearly done. As they stepped through, Liam expected the city to fade behind them, the way dreams dissolve in morning. But it didn't vanish. Instead, it rearranged itself gently in his mind, settling into a place where it could be remembered without being clutched. They emerged into a street that felt familiar in the way a half-forgotten melody does when you hum it again. The buildings were closer, their windows warm. A scent of baking drifted through the air, bread, yes, but also cinnamon, as if the city wanted to make sure this memory had a flavor. A table stood in the middle of the street, 2 cups steaming gently, a small plate between them. The rolls were sugar-dusted, just enough to melt at the first touch of fingers. Liam laughed softly. The city has a sense of humor. It remembers what matters, Ellie said, tearing one of the rolls in half and handing it to him. It keeps the important things warm. They sat, and for a while they didn't talk about the search, or the doors, or the strange alignments. They simply ate, the sugar sticking lightly to their skin, the steam curling upward and dissolving into the night. Rose sat nearby, tail curled neatly, eyes half closed. After a time, Liam leaned back in his chair. So, can we leave? Ellie tilted her head, considering. Leave isn't the right word. The city doesn't keep you. It walks with you until it knows you can carry it. She gestured to the silver key still in his pocket. You'll keep that. If you ever find yourself between again, it will know where to find you. And you? Liam asked. Her smile deepened, calm and sure. I was never lost. I was just, taking the long way home. The bells had stopped, but the quiet that followed was not empty. The street seemed to settle around them, as though it, too, had been waiting for this moment. Overhead, the sky was clear now, not the strange symbol-marked firmament, but a simple stretch of stars, unarranged, unhurried. Liam felt the weight of the little clock in his pocket. He took it out. The hands had stopped moving, resting together over a blank part of the face where no constellation was marked. It no longer needed to point anywhere. Rose stood and stretched. Well, she said, I suppose this is where I fade into the background until someone else needs me. She gave them each a look that was equal parts affection and appraisal. You did well. Then she trotted off down a side street that shimmered like morning mist and was gone. Ellie reached across the table and took Liam's hand. No magic hum, no sudden shift in air, just the steady, ordinary warmth of her skin. Ready? For what? To walk, she said. There's still a lot to see. They rose, leaving the empty cups and crumb-dusted plate behind. The street curved ahead, its cobblestones pale under the starlight. Somewhere in the distance, Liam thought he heard faint music, the kind that wasn't coming from anywhere in particular, but from everywhere at once. As they walked, he realized something: the city might always have been there, just out of sight, waiting for the moment he would need it. And maybe, when you searched for someone you loved, you always found more than you were looking for. You found the place that taught you how to keep walking together. At the next corner, Ellie looked up at him and grinned, the exact grin she used to give when they were children and about to take a shortcut they weren't sure was allowed. Let's see where this one goes. And side by side, with the city breathing quietly around them, they stepped into the turn. The stars whispered above. That's the full 6-part bedtime novel, with a soft, hopeful ending and no loose tension, perfect for a calm, immersive narration that holds listeners until sleep.